Today we're talking about bootleg records. Hey friends, welcome back. So last year I received this record at the P.O. Box. This is Tool's Fear Inoculum on colored vinyl. Now, other than being really happy to have received it, I didn't really think anything of it at the time, but after I posted this photo on Instagram, many of you were quick to point out that it was, in fact, a bootleg record. So today we're going to talk all about bootlegs, and more importantly, I'm going to show you how you can identify one if you happen to see it in the wild. Also, if you enjoyed this video, be sure to subscribe and hit the thumbs up. Okay, now before we dive in, today's song of the day is The Great Gig in the Sky by Pink Floyd. And if you have a suggestion for a song of the day as well, post it in the comments down below and you might see it in a future video. Alright, so first of all, what exactly is a bootleg? Well, the official definition is an illegal musical recording, especially one made at a concert. Also, recordings that are made, distributed, or sold illegally, aka bootleg cassettes, or in this case, bootleg records. So basically, these are unauthorized records that were not pressed by the official labels. And as a side note, they've also been called records of indeterminate origin, or ROIR for short. Now, as Business Insider points out in their article, there's also another distinction between bootlegs and counterfeits. Quote, although the terms can be subjective, bootleg records are not to be confused with counterfeit ones, which are exact duplicates of previously released recordings meant to trick people into paying more for unauthentic music. So essentially, the main difference between these records is that the counterfeits are pretending to be legit and the bootlegs are not. And that's actually something that Frank from channel 33 RPM talked about in his video on bootlegs as well. So that's an important distinction to make. Now, while we're on the topic of definitions, the blanket term for all of these bootlegs, counterfeits, knockoffs, etc. is called the gray market, because legally speaking, all of these releases are kind of in a gray zone. Now, according to many sources, the first modern bootleg in the rock and roll era was a record called Great White Wonder by Bob Dylan. Basically, it was a fan-made compilation of his unreleased music that appeared in 1969. Now, it was called Great White Wonder because the two records themselves came in a very plain, all-white album jacket with a little stamp on the cover which read Great White Wonder. So after that unofficial release, came a flood of other bootleg records in the 70s, followed by bootleg cassettes in the 80s, bootleg CDs in the 90s, and now that people are rediscovering vinyl, we're seeing bootleg records once again. Now, if you think about it, these records do serve a unique purpose. Even though they're not official releases, they allow collectors to get their hands on music that's either never been pressed on vinyl or is super rare and hard to find. So in a sense, for the fans, these bootlegs fill that musical gap that's left over by the record labels. So that's kind of their niche. Now, as far as the bootlegs in my collection, this is the only one that I have, and like I said, it comes on two colored records, one being green and the other being purple. So at a distance, everything looks pretty normal, but if you get a little closer, you'll notice a few details that aren't quite right. The record has no liner notes, no digital download card, and when you scan the barcode on the back, it goes nowhere. So all of that stuff should tell you that you're dealing with a bootleg record. Now, as far as the artwork is concerned, the print quality of the album jacket is a little fuzzy. It's not as crisp and sharp as a normal record would be, so that's another thing that you should look for. And finally, on the back of every official release, usually near the bottom, you're going to see all of the logos, trademarks, and various titles from the companies that were involved in the pressing of that particular record. However, if we look on the back of this one, there's nothing. So yet again, that tells me it's a bootleg. So word of advice, look for the logos. Now, the biggest question of all is, how does this record actually sound? Well, to be perfectly honest, it sounds pretty bad. It's flat, it's hollow, and it just doesn't have the life to it that my legit copy of the album on CD does. I mean, the difference between these two is like night and day. I listened to both of these records with my Audio-Technica headphones, which were plugged into the Yamaha receiver, and all of the EQ settings were turned off, so there was no additional bass or treble being applied to the music. I wanted to basically hear it as is, and overall, I was pretty disappointed with the results. What I found is that the music was high in the trebles and the mid-range, but there was no bass to be found anywhere in the mix. Also, because it sounds so compressed overall, I have to assume that they sourced this from an MP3, which we all know is a terrible idea. But that seems to be pretty common among bootleg records. So basically, even though the record looks cool, the sound quality is just not there. So for now, I'm just gonna stick with the CD. Now, I also found this post on the Tool Band subreddit where they're talking about these exact same records. And generally, the consensus here is that yes, they were most likely ripped from MP3s. Now, it's also important to note that if you're playing this record on a lower quality turntable to begin with, you might not be able to hear the difference. So that's another thing to keep in mind. Now, onto the question of who made these records and where they came from. The jury's still out on that one. No one really knows. And as a side note, you also cannot buy them on Discogs because they banned the sale of them. So we'll get into the legal nature of these records in a second. But first, a few years ago, I did run into this copy of 10,000 Days at Amoeba Music in Hollywood. And almost immediately, I knew it was a bootleg because the original is super hard to find, and it definitely would not be in a crate for only $34.99. If it was the real thing, it'd be up on the wall or in a glass case. Now, I didn't pick it up, but if I had, it probably would have sounded just as bad as this one. Now, as we touched on a second ago, you may be wondering, is it legal to buy, sell, or own bootleg records? And the answer here is, it's not really clear. Yet again, this is why they call it the gray market. Now, I'm no lawyer, but I would venture to say that owning them, probably no big deal. Selling them might get you into trouble. So regardless of what everyone else is doing on eBay, I would err on the side of caution. Now, if you want to dive a little deeper into the history of bootleg records, there's a great site called bobsboots.com, which is specifically dedicated to Bob Dylan bootlegs, and they also have a Q&A page with more info on bootlegs in general. There's also another site called toolvinyl.com, which has a few articles on the various Tool bootlegs that have come out over the years. So if you're a fan of Tool like I am, that's also a good one to check out. And finally, last of all, there's an article on rarerecords.net, which also covers the history of bootlegs and has a lot of great info as well. Now, overall, my final thoughts on these bootleg records is that since they have such poor sound quality, I can't really picture myself playing them over and over again. So therefore, I'm not gonna go out of my way to collect them. Basically, I prefer the real thing. But what do you guys think about bootlegs? Do you have any of these in your collection? And if you do, did you know they were bootlegs when you got them? Let me know down in the comments below, and if you love record collecting in general, feel free to subscribe and hit the bell notifications so you won't miss out on the new videos. And most importantly of all, friends, have an awesome day, stay safe, and keep spinning that vinyl.